Time remaining until the test begins, 0008, 0007. Activating my dematerialization ability, I flew calmly up to the stone slab that blocked the entrance. The timer was counting down the last seconds, but I felt not the slightest fear or nervousness. Maybe this was one of the abilities of a ghost. Most likely. Everything around was quiet and calm. The fighters were gripping their weapons, getting ready for the fight. They were nervous. But it was nothing to me. No, more than that. I wanted to see as soon as possible what challenges the system had come up with for us. 0002, 0001. Chapter 21. The stone was covered in cracks within seconds and crumbled into pieces, with a corridor leading into the depths of the underground appearing before me. Defying my expectations, a stream of monsters didn't come streaming out of the now open entrance, and nothing was visible in the distance. It was like the skeletons had decided to set up an ambush, to come out of the woodwork at the worst possible moment. And that is actually what happened. First off, I flew about 50 feet into the depths, and only then did I spot a patrol in the distance. A big guy, accompanied by 5 normal skeletons and 2 leapers, was walking right toward me. But as soon as he reached the turn, he turned back around, slowly puttering back, with his entourage hobbling behind him. After 10 minutes, they had gone back and forth a few times, and when they started heading away from me once again, I decided to materialize. I had to check how they would act and figure out the best way to fight them. Obviously, I would have to either break their skulls or crack them off their necks, but they did have those crystals in their chests, and it made sense to try and stab them there. On the other hand, the area was pretty well protected for each monsters, and that approach might be hard to pull off. As soon as I appeared and my feet touched the ground, I heard a rustling behind me. Turning, I saw 2 skeletons crawling right out of the ground. They had grown in the earth, and now were stretching out slowly to attack me within a few seconds and feast on my fresh, warm flesh. But I wasn't going to give them the pleasure. The first one had just lifted his head when my halberd hit him right on the skull, and the second one could only get his arms stretched forward by the time the sharp point hit him right in the eye, breaking his face and destroying his head. The bones crashed down and crystals fell out of the bodies. They weren't shining so brightly now, but still, in the semi-darkness, you could still see a dim flickering of a reddish fire trapped inside. I immediately thought that this must be the soul of the dead, but I wasn't about to fill my head up with unnecessary pondering and waved it away. I put the crystals into my inventory, then headed back. They had no hearing and no sight, I was sure of that. The empty eyes of the patrol stared at me indifferently, unblinking, and I disappeared around the corner, headed back to the starting room. So? The fighters met me at the entrance of the underground. Did you see anyone? Yeah, no big deal, really. You stay here for now, I'll take care of it, and if I need something, I'll call you. I was just about to disappear, but I stopped. Don't follow me. The monsters come right out of the floor, and that might be a problem for you. I reminded them again, since I really didn't want to share my rewards later. In response, I heard only dissatisfied grumbling, but nobody was going to argue with me directly. At least Brownie nodded, and the others simply couldn't disagree with him. Vanishing into the air, I flew back to the patrol, and without warning activated my cleave attack, taking out all the leapers and 3 of the normal skeletons right away. Then, while they were turning around, looking for their opponent, I materialized behind them, and with a sweeping blow turned another skeleton into a pile of bones. Really, they were pretty easy opponents. My weapon wasn't getting stuck in their rotten meat, so there was no point in constantly disappearing to pull the blade out of their bodies. So, jumping backwards, I attacked the nearest enemy again, stabbing him right in the face. I almost paid dearly for that. The enemies turned out to be pretty fast, and as soon as they found me, they immediately rushed to attack me. Our zombies were not nearly that speedy, maybe because zombie skeleton level. 10. The system even called them something else, but it was true that in this case, he was really withered. The only thing that recalled his former shape was the pieces of dried flesh and scraps of clothing. Some of them also had pieces of medieval armor hanging off of them, and judging from the fact that they weren't system items, you could make a guess about the history of this group of people. But I would worry about that after I took care of the underground. His spiky fist whistled through me at an unbelievable speed, but the big guy hadn't even finished his punch before I appeared next to him with my weapon held high. Thankfully, the height of the roof and the width of the corridors allowed me to swing my halberd without even thinking about it. The blade crashed down onto a thick bone, but I wasn't able to break through it with my first hit. The weapon just left some traces and cracks behind, nothing more. His bones were too solid to try to break them in half, so I started hitting him in the joints. I cut down the last regular skeleton in passing, smashing his neck with my axe a few times, and only then setting myself onto the big guy seriously. This was my first enemy like this, so I had to figure out with him exactly where it would be best to hit the next ones. First, I tried his lower extremities. His knee joints looked to be very strong in themselves, but on top of that, they were covered with bone growths on all sides. The bone growths were segmented, but they only opened up with the monster moved, like when he sat, or the opposite, when he fully extended his legs. To hit them, I would have to guess the right moment, and I didn't want to do that. Or I couldn't if there was a bunch of mutated monsters around me. His spine was also pretty thick, not worth even trying to cut it, and it was also protected by additional bones. His head was like a clothes iron. There was nowhere to hit, since you couldn't break through that upper floor. Except that you might be able to get through by the eyes. But the places that were left with openings were so small that the halberd just couldn't get in. I would have to try with my bow. Before figuring out that archery was really not my thing, I had already wasted 5 arrows, and all of them immediately turned to dust upon touching him, since he was a really tough target. I wasn't about to waste my fire arrows, and trying to burn those bones wouldn't work anyway, since the arrows wouldn't have anything to catch on to. While doing that, 2 more skeletons came out of the floor. That was because I had moved around during the fight and disturbed some remains. But I didn't let them get up, just knocked them down before they even arose. If a whole horde of them started rising up, that would be a problem, but taking care of 2 of them was just too easy. Don't get up, guys. There's no need for that much formality. After taking care of the normal ones, I switched back to the big guy. He was flying toward me at full speed, hoping to knock me off my feet and trample me into the ground with his powerful paws. But at the last moment, his victim vanished into thin air, and he slammed into the stone wall at full speed, smashing his head into it and creating a localized earthquake. He really was a clothes iron. Without slowing down, I appeared behind him again, looking for weak spots by constantly stabbing at him. His ribs were covered. I couldn't get through underneath either, since there was a bone on his diaphragm too, completely covering the crystal. Wherever I looked, there were bones. He had too much calcium when he was alive, the bastard. That had to be it. But I still didn't stop in my attempt to get the bastard. After hitting the wall, he came to his senses basically right away and started swinging his massive fist like a millstone. Each time that his powerful hand, covered in spikes, flew through me, I materialized again and tried to hit him in the eye or nose, but it was all useless. It was as if he had bones welded over every hole, and the only way to get to the bastard would be to break through them. But for that, I would need a blunt weapon. Brass knuckles were good, but a hammer would be even better. "You haven't thrown away your old hammer, have you?" I scared the fighters by appearing right behind them. "Jesus, when are you going to stop doing that?" shouted the berserker. He had jumped higher at my appearance than anyone else. "Never," said Brownie. After a few seconds, he handed me his old weapon. "But it has very little durability left." I nodded at him, dematerialized, and headed back. What was weird was that the big guy had completely forgotten about my existence and had kept patrolling his duty area. What was worse, the bastard had completely healed all his injuries and was walking through the tunnel proudly, alone, and without a care in the world. When he was far away, I picked up the crystals from the regular skeletons and then followed behind him. I wanted to know from how far away those monsters could sense me. It seemed to be about 50 feet. I had no strong feelings about that information, but still, better to know than be left in the dark. They sensed life. They couldn't see, they couldn't hear, they just sensed. It made no difference if I was moving or standing still, if I was behind his back or lingering in front of his face. He pinpointed me just the same, always within those 50 feet. Or it could be 40. They were all a little different. But that was only when I was a person. He couldn't feel a ghost at all, unlike those animals. And ghosts were, by definition, undead. It was an interesting thought, but it didn't do me any good either. I could think about it for a while later, but definitely not now. With the hammer, everything went much smoother and faster. I appeared right on his shoulders, slamming the weapon right into the back of his head, and then immediately disappeared. But only for a second, then I did it again. Every time the cracks spread wider, and eventually his skull finally couldn't hold out any longer and cracked into pieces. As soon as the beast died, the force holding his bones together disappeared, and they clattered onto the floor. But I was no longer afraid of making sounds, since the only people who could hear here were those 4 former police officers, and they wouldn't dare give me a ticket for a misdemeanor, even if I were to make a drunken fool of myself. The big guy's chest held a crystal of a larger size, and it glowed significantly more brightly than those of the regular skellies. Even though I didn't know what it might do for me, I still put it in my inventory. If it was useless, then I would just throw it away. Warhammer, normal, 54 out of 300. Description: a normal warhammer. It can strike, it can be thrown. If necessary, it may be used as a tool. I looked at my new weapon and read the description. Theoretically, there was nothing there that you could argue with the system about, cursing it for some kind of deliberate omission. Everything was accurate and to the point. Except the durability was really crap. I think it would be 1 or 2 big guys before I would have to stand guiltily before Brownie and ask for forgiveness. I'm joking, of course. I had given him something much better. And in the right hands, you could do a whole lot with it. And if he was upset about it, then he could stick that cool thing right up his useless ass. At least I tried. In any case, to avoid losing my weapon at the worst possible moment, I opened up a dozen gray spheres, throwing all the useless stuff right on the floor. There were no hammers among the rewards, but I did get a repair kit. So now my new weapon had 104 points of durability. That should be enough. I tossed the hammer into my inventory and immediately started forward. There was no point in dematerializing, since if I did, nothing would come out of the floors. Then I would have to go through this corridor again and clean up the leftovers. That would be an unnecessary waste of time. At first, everything went swimmingly. The deadies would start rising up, and I would immediately chop them down with my halberd, and they couldn't do anything to me. But the farther I went, the more often I ran into them. And eventually the walls next to me crashed open, and 2 big guys came out of them. They immediately tried to grab me and squish me. Oh, go hug yourselves. I had already made a habit of turning on my class skill, so I would disappear at the hint of any danger right away, flying off to a safe distance. They did actually end up in an embrace, so it was no difficulty for me to climb up on the shoulders of one of them and start beating his bald skull with my hammer. They didn't stay holed up for long, and I noted for myself once again that every type of enemy needed their own weapon. Some of them were easiest to take out with a bow. The halberd worked best against crowds, and a normal hammer worked wonders on the big guys. Although this was more like a sledgehammer, but no matter. It would definitely be worth it to get a set of everything I needed. I would pick something that worked against the acid spitters, find the perfect thing to quickly and easily get rid of leapers. My strong point was that I could constantly disappear and reappear exactly where I needed to be, and with exactly the right weapon that I needed at that moment. There were a lot of positives to my class, but that was one of the big ones. The farther I went, the more often I was attacked from all sides, both by big guys and by crowds of normal skeletons. Once I fell into an ambush. The tunnel made a sharp 90-degree turn, and as soon as I turned the corner, I ran into another patrol. But in addition to a big guy and 2 leapers, there was also a shooter. That mutant had a different body shape than ours, above ground. He fired out of 2 cannons on his shoulders in turn, and he didn't have to bend down to aim. Because of that, he shot twice as fast, and there was no point in even considering taking him on in a duel with a bow in your hands. As soon as they noticed me, I immediately hid around the corner, but deadies had started gathering behind me, cutting off my retreat. 4 regular zombies and 2 leapers had come out of the floor and the walls and came right in for an attack on this unlucky traveler. But he just up and disappeared. Bad planning. A normal group would have just been shot right down here. Mine too, actually, but thankfully I didn't take them with me. I didn't think those guys were weak, and getting through the underground with 5 people would be much faster, but I thought that if I killed everyone here, or practically everyone, all on my own, the system would appreciate it. I spent more time with this group than any other. It was the shooter who ruined everything, shooting spikes at me as soon as I materialized. So I had to materialize for him to unload both of his cannons, and only then could I appear again to attack. Thankfully, my mana now ran out much more slowly. There was the fact that my total amount had increased, but my rare skill that absorbed it from the monsters around me also helped. And also from my allies, if they ever decided to join the fun. In the end, I had to lure the skeletons around the corner. I had wanted to use the head for that, but my opponents couldn't hear anything, so Gosha would only attract Brownie and his compatriots with his yelling. All right, it was time for me to take this head and level it up a little. As soon as the bony monsters started running after me, I started making some sharp zigzags, not letting the shooter aim, and after a few seconds, I vanished into the air, heading toward him at max speed. The blade of my halberd cut through the smooth bones at the back of the skull with a crack, putting a significant hole there, and my second hit caused the monster to fall into pieces. Farther along, everything was just as before. I knocked down the regular skeletons with my cleave attack and messed up the big guys with the hammer. Eventually, that started to get boring. And even though the crystals that were piling up in my inventory warmed my heart, this test was starting to drag on. But strangely enough, there were no more surprises awaiting me farther along. Sure, sometimes mutants broke out of the walls, and whole groups of normal skeletons came up from the floor. There was even another patrol, but I took care of them in about 5 minutes. There were branches in the path, and I went down each other to completely wipe out all the sons of bitches here. I was so sure that the more monsters I could finish off, the better my reward would be. Eventually, I saw that the corridor had ended, leading into a wide open area. After 50 yards, I dematerialized, calmly floating into the room, looking around attentively right away. God damn, had they built something here? The place was enormous. It was about 300 feet long, 150 wide, and 200 tall. There were massive, monumental columns, completely carved by unknown ancient masters and covered in decadent patterns, stretching upwards to hold up hundreds of thousands of tons of stone. The floor and the walls had been made of bright gray stone, polished to perfection, although everything on the ground was covered in a thick layer of dust. The lighting here was not due to ancient torches like it had been in the cave, but rather a gentle white light shone out of the patterns in the columns. It was an intoxicating sight. I would have looked through every nook and cranny, but my attention was seized by a human figure standing in the exact center of the room. There could be no doubt that this was the first boss. What made him different from the normal monsters was that he still had skin. This was no bare skeleton, but a real-ass, sun-dried zombie. I flew around him a couple of times, carefully taking in all his features. He was dressed in scraps of expensive-looking clothing, but the black cloak that looked like it was absorbing the light and the hood that covered his head looked like he had just put them on out of the laundry, and that he had washed them with coal. He had gloves on his hands and 2 daggers on his belt. I didn't notice anything else odd, so, judging my chances to be pretty high, I materialized behind him and immediately swung down on him, trying to split his head in half. But my halberd just clanged helplessly on the stone floor, since my opponent had turned into a pitch-black cloud, allowing my weapon to pass right through him. The cloud hung in the air for only a fraction of a second, and then disappeared. Just gone. But I couldn't even blink an eye before my back was pierced with a sharp pain, and the 2 bloody tips of the daggers appeared on the other side of my stomach. Chapter 22. Oh, you are fast, you asshole. I didn't understand how he managed to stab me with the 2 daggers that fast, but his attack had taken away half of my health points all at once. And even though I had activated my dematerialization skill almost immediately, that moment was still more than enough for him. Thankfully, though, in my ghost form, I didn't feel pain, and I didn't bleed. But as soon as I returned to my own body, I would start slowly dying. Or maybe not so slowly. As soon as I disappeared, the bastard froze. But the daggers didn't leave his hands, and he was ready to attack me as soon as I appeared. His dried-up face didn't show any emotion, and his empty eyes stared into space in front of him. I couldn't guess what kind of monster this was. I also had no idea how I was going to fight him, but whatever the case was, I had to finish this prick off. Calling the fighters for help was pointless, since he would just slaughter them like kittens, and they would only distract for a few seconds at most. Although I didn't think he could use his teleportation skill as much as he wanted. Sooner or later it would run out, and then this would be a completely different fight. As I was thinking, I got as close to him as possible. My mana reached its limit pretty quickly, meaning that this monster had a lot of it. But I was patient. Plus, I had something to do. I had yet to open up rewards or take a potion as a ghost. I simply never considered that it might be possible at all. And now, since I couldn't materialize, and I couldn't get away from the boss, I had to experiment. I already had a potion in my inventory, but one would definitely not be enough, so my first task was to open some potatoes. That turned out to be not very convenient, since the plates of food had to go into my inventory, since I couldn't just throw them out. Maybe I was simply doing it wrong. The system had told me from the very first day that my class skill would get better as I did. And it wasn't just talking about levels. I had to put some work into it myself, by learning, experimenting, and practicing. But the only thing I had done up until now was just cheerfully fly through walls and enjoy even that small accomplishment. I didn't think the system had told some archmage all its spells. More likely, that class just gave you the ability to use magic, and the rest had to be invented by the person himself. He taught himself how to throw fireballs of different shapes and sizes, how to create lightning, and how to turn puddles on the sidewalk into heaps of super-sharp icicles. Skills were something else. Using them, any person could throw the same fireball, but its shape, size, speed, temperature, and other factors were all strictly controlled by the system in accordance with the level of the skill. Once I had come to these conclusions, I had to think about classes, and I thought that was rather important information. Sure, I would have to ask some people about this more in detail, but I thought I was right. With the potions, everything seemed simple. As soon as I concentrated on it with the desire to use it, it simply disappeared and my health bar started slowly going up. I had to take 3 bottles, since waiting for my health to come back completely would otherwise have taken way too long. In the future, I was sure this experience would save my life more than once. And that was just the beginning. My class would expand its limits and show me its true power. This time I decided not to attack from behind. He would sense me anyway, so what was the use? This way, maybe I could stab him in the eye, or at least I could try. But as soon as I materialized, he turned into a dark cloud again and teleported behind me. But this time I was ready and disappeared before he could hit me with a cheap shot. And I wasn't going to leave his attempt unpunished, swinging my weapon to let off a cleave attack, hitting him right in the neck. No, his mana still hadn't run out. Somehow he managed to react and once again turned into a cloud, teleporting a few feet away. But you can't jump around like that forever, dickbag. This time I appeared farther away, about 50 feet away. And as soon as I materialized, I loosed a normal arrow at my opponent. I hadn't even thought about aiming at his head. I just needed to wear the monster out enough that he couldn't dodge all my attacks. But somehow, that's where it landed. Deadies don't get tired. But I am a pretty patient dude, so in this regard we are on equal footing. The fighters had a lot of food left, so they wouldn't starve, and I hoped that they wouldn't join the fray without orders due to boredom. 20 arrows missed completely. Each time the boss easily avoided them and instantly teleported behind me to hit me with signature move using the 2 daggers. But I already knew that strategy, so nothing came of it for him. Just wasting mana for nothing. Not all of the arrows remained intact, but those that didn't turn to dust I put into my inventory. I kept wearing the bastard down, appearing in random places over and over. And eventually I managed to hit the bitch. Maybe not in the head, but still, it was great news. He was getting tired, and sooner or later he would completely lose the ability to hide from me in his black cloud. Or maybe his mana was running out. I continued to use up the rest of my arrows, and within a couple of minutes there were 5 of them sticking out of the boss. But all of them in his chest. He wasn't leaving his head vulnerable. But even so, he still hadn't given up on trying to get me. He ran fairly fast, too, still dodging arrows comparatively well. At least those that flew towards his head. What was bad was that every time I disappeared, he stopped. So I couldn't use the trick that had won me the victory with the gorilla. And here it was easier to use the cleave attack. He tried to avoid the bright wave of light that was flying out of my weapon, but where to? He moved extremely swiftly, but even his reaction with dexterity through the roof couldn't help him entirely avoid getting injured. But I didn't manage to get him in the neck. After a few attacks, I had ripped up his chest, cut his legs, and even got a glancing blow on his head, knocking the bastard's hood off and tearing up his scalp. Only then did some emotion appear on his face, but there was no fear in his eyes. The mask of indifference on his face had snapped into a mask of fury and rage. I was standing only a few feet away from him, so I could see everything in detail, but he just kept standing there like a statue, waiting for me to appear again. He was angry, that's what it meant. Maybe now he would start doing something stupid? What was amazing was that, despite all of my attacks, his cloak remained whole and undamaged. Just like his hood, which had gotten a direct hit. I was sure that the thing was definitely uncommon, maybe even rare, and would soon be in my own collection. Around this bastard my mana came back like crazy, so right away I could continue terrorizing the poor, infuriated boss. And that was a fairly interesting fact. His reserves were at about 0, but my ability was still absorbing it like crazy. It seemed like the percentages were based off the maximum amount. He was going around the spacious room like a madman, running around the columns that I sometimes hid behind, and after a half hour of this wild goose chase, he even started moaning at his own impotence. No, he did have some emotions, and that was amazing. My arrows ran out pretty quickly, and I wasn't about to use the fire ones, since I was very much afraid of damaging his clothes. They were almost mine by now, and ruining such a beautiful cloak would be idiotic. So I had to get up close and personal again. I started to appear next to him, doing swift hits with my halberd, then immediately vanishing into the air, materializing back on the other side. The Dedi easily avoided all my attacks, and it seemed like he could keep this up forever. But eventually I took the advice in the hammer's description, appearing about 5 feet away from the monster, and threw the weapon almost without aiming. He skillfully dodged my clumsy throw, but at that moment I stabbed him in the back of the head with my halberd. Phew! I sat down on the stone floor, in disbelief that it was over. The monster's remains fell down right there, but I was just too exhausted to pick up or even simply look at the rewards. To avoid wasting time, I began opening up my potatoes. Soon I had a whole mountain of food and 3 potions in front of me. Only after I used them could I appreciate life again. And then, right the away I got to my feet and approached the corpse splayed out on the floor. Yeah, it was very important to have a stockpile of potatoes, at least for situations like this. If it weren't for the potion, I would have had to rest for many hours just to be able to keep going with the test. Cloak of Shadow, rare. Reaction +5, hit prediction. Set shadow clothing, 1 out of 7. Description: hit prediction, a passive skill. You have a 50% chance of foreseeing an attack a quarter of a second before it hits you. Set skill: when in darkness, you will get a 3 times bonus to the following stats: perception, reaction, dexterity. You will also gain the following attribute: imperceptibility. Not bad. It wouldn't help me that much, of course, but anything was better than this ratty brown cloak. And it looked way cooler. Plus, it gave me more interesting bonuses. The boss had sensed at least half of my attacks in advance, so he easily dodged them and was able to attack me in return. I was sure that the rest of the set would have similar abilities, allowing me to foresee my opponent's every move. But knowing the system, it probably just wouldn't ever let me collect the whole set. Even this ancient, dried-up warrior hadn't been able to. The daggers turned out to be normal, non-system items. They were made out of either stainless steel or silver. I didn't really care about it. In any case, things like that didn't really interest me. But this hood, which also seemed to be an individual item, like my own, both excited me and annoyed me at the same time. It excited me by also being part of the Shadows set, but in everything else it was just a useless plaything. Hood of Shadow, rare. Unrecognizable, insight. Set shadow clothing, 2 out of 7. Description: mana 10 out of 10. Unrecognizable, a passive skill. Allows the owner to hide his identity. Other creatures will not be able to recognize your face, or your name, or any other information about you. Insight, an active skill. Allows you to see general information about any creature in your field of vision. Damage, mana reserves, level, class, name. Costs 10 mana. Set skill: when in darkness, you will get a 3 times bonus to the following stats: perception, reaction, dexterity. You will also gain the following attribute: imperceptibility. It could have at least raised my perception or reaction. That would have been a lot more useful, since I wasn't planning on hiding from anyone. On the other hand, the active ability could be useful. Knowing as much as you could about an opponent in advance was definitely worthwhile. It sat comfortably and didn't block my vision, although it did fall over my eyes a little. Basically, it was a comfortable thing that would certainly come in handy eventually. So I put the ratty old brown cloak in my inventory and placed the handsome new one on my head. I had to dig around a bit to get the crystal. But after his death, his bones had become much more fragile, so in the end, I just carefully smashed through his rib cage with my hammer and grabbed what was in there. This new crystal didn't seem as hefty as the ones I got from the big guys and the shooters. It was just covered with golden calligraphic patterns, which hinted at its higher value. I could only guess what they were for. But with every crystal I go, it felt more clear that somewhere at the end of the test, they would definitely come in handy. It might just be that these red trinkets would turn out to be normal domestic currency. I didn't find anything else interesting in this room. I turned over every corner, just in case, but besides dust, dirt, and ancient rags thrown around, I didn't see a darn thing. Just a waste of time. I had actually been depending on the system's conventions. In a lot of ways, it copied video games, and in boss rooms, you can often find some kind of hidden treasure. No such luck this time. Too bad. I kept moving on, smashing every deadie that came up into bones along the way. After such a difficult enemy, they just seemed like annoying hindrances in my way, which I had to overcome. I didn't forget to check the dead-end branches either. I encountered skeletons there, too, and once a shooter attacked me in an ambush. He came out of the wall, so I wasn't able to catch sight of him, and so he got off the first shot. But literally an instant before the muffled thunk came, something hiccuped inside of me, and I automatically activated my dematerialization skill, allowing the fatal gift to pass right through me. So it works. Most likely the cloak. And even if I probably could have dodged it, still, the thing was extremely useful in some way. And who cared that it had a 50-50 chance of working? It was a lot better than nothing. I looked through every dead end carefully. Who knew where treasures might be hidden? What was annoying, though, was that I couldn't fly through the walls here. Except for those that separated two tunnels, I mean. So it was clear that the system wasn't going to let me pass beyond the limits of the test. There could be two reasons for that. Either this place was artificial and was made of only what I could see, or it could be that everything was happening exclusively within my own mind. Or we were in a different world entirely. That reminded me of the boss. He was clearly not a person. Although his face had been significantly worn down and disfigured by time, it still wasn't too hard to figure out that, in life, he had looked completely different from us. He had been noticeably taller than his withered compatriots, and he had a much more compact physique. Maybe he had been part of the aristocracy or something like that. That was where I got the idea that we had been taken to some new, unexplored world. But that was just an unsubstantiated guess. Eventually, the already broad corridor widened even more, and the torches illuminating it changed into flickering blue patterns adorning the walls and the ceiling, demonstrating the rich imagination and talent of some unknown master. But more often than not, I was forced to stop admiring the local architecture. Skeletons were now coming from everywhere, from the floor, the walls, and even the ceiling. 2 leapers jumped down from somewhere at the same time, but they landed onto an empty floor and lost their heads. The cleave wave did a great job of taking care of those vulnerable enemies. When I caught sight of an exit in the distance, I hurried up as much as I could. I was super bored of this underground, and I wanted to get out of here as soon as possible. Yeah, ideally, I would do that alive, so there was no point in asking for trouble, but still, I had at least stopped conserving the durability of my halberd. Every new crystal that I put into my inventory was literally screaming about how I could trade it for something valuable, just as soon as I finished this, took out the boss, and got it done. Thinking that, I burst into the last room and froze. You did a hell of a job here, King. The place was round, shaped like a dome. It was about 300 feet in diameter, maybe even a little more. The roof was covered in patterns that shone even brighter here. Unlike the previous room, Here I could see the remnants of a former luxury. The busted-up and worn-out furniture, once luxurious and expensive, the tableware made of both metal and gleaming stones, the scraps of clothing, and the bones. A ton of bones. And in the middle of all of this splendor, right in the center of the room, he was enthroned. The boss, you had to assume. But he, like the last one, was just frozen, seeming like he was asleep. His eyes were closed, and his face expressed complete peacefulness and calm. His pose was also relaxed. He was leaning on the back of the throne with his head nodding a little to the side. A staff was laid over his lap, and it looked fairly costly and high quality. There was no doubt that it was a system item. On top of that, it had to be at least rare, since the gray and green ones looked much more simple. And there was an engraving with a precious gem at the tip. Just like the last boss, I decided to start by studying him, carefully observing him from all sides. He had a flail in his left hand that also looked interesting, but everything else was useless and half falling apart. Even what looked like a crown, sitting on his withered head, had been battered and corroded by time. I had no idea what had happened here. A massacre for sure. There were at least 100 creatures in this room, and it clearly had not been their intention to die. But what would happen when I materialized? Would those bones maybe form into some kind of mega-skeleton? But the fact was that the bones here were scattered about at random, and it didn't look like it was some kind of zombie army. Plus, I had already killed more than 100 of them, and there should only be one boss left here. I flew around him a few times, carefully taking in every detail that could do me good in the upcoming battle. I didn't know myself what was disturbing me so much about him. I got close and began to stare into his face. "You have found your death here." A hoarse voice came from literally all sides. And at that very moment, the king of the skeletons leapt to his feet, opened his eyes, and stared right at me. A look like that promised nothing good, so I immediately put some distance between us, moving over to the side. But he continued flawlessly following me with his eyes, no matter where I flew off to. "You cannot hide. Feel the wrath of the king." The entire room shouted once more, and a bright flash burst out of the staff, lighting up the whole room in an instant. Chapter 23. "Did you really eat everything?" I said, startling the resting fighters. "Motherfucker, would you stop doing that?" Slob jumped up. Okay, not a great nickname to pick, but still, it meant something. "I'm gonna kill you one—" "Should I knock before I show up?" I cut him off and laughed. "You asked for it." "You done a what?" Brownie intoned, annoyed, getting up from the dirty floor. "We have been sitting around here God knows how long, a whole day at least." "No," I shook my head, "and I need your help. It was a miracle, let me say, that I got out of the last boss's room. More precisely, because of his stupidity, most probably. As soon as he started yelling so pretentiously, I immediately headed for the exit, predicting that after his monologue, the big bad normally does something terrible. That is essentially what happened. He raised his staff, and after the bright flash, the bones on the floor started moving, forming themselves into some shapeless construction. That would be no problem for me, but the next spell was an attack. Energy started gathering on the tip of the staff, and in a few seconds it turned into a powerful ray and, gleaming with discharges of purple lightning, headed straight at me. And I couldn't even manage to hide from it. It just passed right through me, but even so, I lost 30% of my health all at once. Thankfully, nothing had followed me, and after a few minutes I materialized somewhere in the middle of the underground with no mana left. I opened up 30 potatoes and swallowed down the potions that I got, then continued on my way. Eventually, I got back to normal, and the time came for me to consider what I was going to do about that monster. There were really not that many possibilities. Just one, really. I had to kill him.
I could survive at least one ray easily without taking damage. I would just use my ring of mana absorption, and even if it broke because of that, it was good enough.
I would survive, and the boss would waste his charge. If he had no more tricks up his sleeves, then everything would end there, but something told me it wasn't going to be that easy. I needed the fighters to distract the bone monsters. I believed that as soon as I finished off the king, they would all immediately fall into their individual bones, and the test would be over. Anyway, I'm not forcing anybody. If you don't want to risk it, I will do it myself. That was how I ended my summary of what they would be expecting there. Helping in the test was not part of our agreement, so... No, we're coming. Brownie shook his head. But next time we're going through the underground together, because all this waiting is driving me nuts. Honestly, I was about to follow after you a few times, but I was worried about pissing you off. The rest of them just nodded in agreement. But they were still young. Even though they wanted to fight, they had decided to listen to me, and they did right. The first boss would have made mincemeat of them, and the second one too, since his death ray had been completely unexpected. All right, then we need to discuss our strategy. I nodded and sat on the floor. I had been wandering through the underground for about 10 hours, and I had gotten really hungry in that time. Actually, I didn't even know if it was more than 10 hours. I might have spent a whole day roaming through this place. The boys had raised their stats for later a few times during that wait, and so their store of food had also run out. So I simply invested a few points each and dematerialized, so everything passed by with no unfortunate side effects. The others would have to suffer. For example, raising strength by 1 point puts a person out of commission for about 3 hours. They just lie down and groan in pain. Then they need even more time to get back to normal. So people usually put off raising their stats, waiting for a quiet moment when they can lie around safely. And that was just what they had gotten. Catch, they're for you. I had started taking green potatoes out of my inventory and throwing them at the fighters. Everybody got one, with a small exception. Brownie got 2, and I forgot the berserker. Hey, why did you give them some and not me? He was annoyed, seeing that there were no more gifts coming. Take a look at yourself. Soon enough your fingers won't fit into your brass knuckles, not to mention your pants. The spearman cackled, the completely opposite of the berserker. Because of his height, he looked as thin as a rake. I'll show you, fucker. Slob growled, but Brown stopped him right away, putting a burly hand on his shoulder. I am going to open your potato, dumbass. If you want, I can give it to you and you can do it yourself. But you do remember what you usually get, right? The burly man's words calmed the berserker down, and after grumbling a little, he nodded in agreement. Sitting a little apart, I got out my last blue potato. I suddenly thought about how it wouldn't be too bad to put a few comforts in my inventory. Something like a table, a comfortable chair, maybe some other stuff, like a tablet or something else for entertainment. But I hadn't thought of that in time, so now I had to put everything on the dirty floor. The fighters had gotten hearty but fairly simple meals, and the air was filled with the smells of fried chicken, shawarma, and borscht. They stopped talking immediately, stopping their joking around, and set about chowing down their food. Only the plates were clinking and Bale was chomping loudly. The tall boy, who joined our team as a spearman, and because of it he kept getting well-deserved smacks. I got some long, broad, flat spaghetti, covered with mushroom cream sauce, something like dumplings with either sour cream or cheese, and some crunchy toasted with a chocolate spread. For a drink, I was treated to another bottle of wine, but I wasn't too happy about it this time. I definitely didn't want to get drunk now, but I did think that another health potion would sober me up immediately. I'm not going to share. I shook my head at their peaked glances. Don't even ask. We didn't even want it anyway, mumbled the berserker. Everything's good with us over here. And that was all. Silence fell over the room, and only the echoes of our chewing reverberated through the long corridors, letting the king of skeletons know that we were coming, in full military readiness and an exceptionally good mood. While I was eating, I checked my interface just in case, and I learned something interesting from that. It turned out that I absolutely could have shared my food, and I didn't have to lick each plate clean. My strength stat had increased just as soon as I slurped up the first long piece of pasta. But I said that I wasn't going to share, and that meant I wasn't going to. I just put the partially drunk bottle of wine into my inventory as soon as I had finished my hearty dinner. Or supper, who knows. Time seems to pass differently here than it does above ground. It was nothing like the personal test, which seemed like a normal fight for the enjoyment of the system, but it was as if we were completing some kind of task. For who and why? Those were other questions, but this was a completely different story, and there was no point in getting hung up on it. Hey, if you kill something like you, do you get their ability? Or just something random? While the rest of them were finishing their feast, I decided to learn more about leveling up the head. Most often, yes, Gosha tried to nod. Let me swear, or that fat ass chewing with his mouth open is going to drive me crazy. He couldn't contain himself just a few seconds after getting out. And how could you kill something like you? I ignored his request. Chewing them, or what? Well, eventually, with abilities. As for now, it's your problem. He grinned. You'll think of something. You also have a head, even it is more like an ass. I'll use you to beat zombies to death, and then we'll see if you start talking. I grinned dryly in response. Okay, tell me everything openly. How is your skill going to work? How will leveling you up be like? And in general, everything you can remember. And tell me everything you can't remember, too. This artifact was a pain in the ass. And if it weren't for the potential power he had, I would have thrown him away a long time ago. The only good thing was that once he got his first attack skill, he could feed himself, and then his potential would fully open up. But he hadn't given me complete information before. Killing a deity with Gosha would be hard, but something alive? That was totally possible. As of now, the artifact was not much different from a normal sentient zombie. The only difference was his lack of a body. That was all. Even now, the son of a bitch could control other zombies. It was only hampered by his level. His subordinates couldn't be more than 2 levels higher than him. There were some other small caveats, but in general, that was it. That meant that even now, he could take control of some second-level big guy in a crowd of zombies who could easily carry him around, or possibly engage in improving the land 24/7. Plus, the skills of sentient zombies weren't really skills at all. Instead, they got a talent, based on which the deadies could cast different kinds of magic. It was kind of like our classes, but much more restricted. That meant a single zombie couldn't cast both fireballs and ice arrows. Just one of them, and then they would develop solely along that path. To do that, I would have to kill either a sentient zombie or person who had already picked a class. No other way. It was a lot easier with the living in this regard, since there were a lot more of them, and I could take my time picking the right victim. Then it wouldn't matter at all. The two of us could burn the whole world down around us. And the rest of the higher being will latch onto me like that. It is unavoidable. And I can put only one of them under my control. At level 2, I can put 2, and so on. The head finished his speech, and as soon as I realized he had no more information, I put him back in my inventory. An unbelievably powerful artifact, as I was realizing now. While I was talking with Gosha, the fighters had finished eating and were now preparing themselves as much as possible for the upcoming battle, discussing who would be attacking who and how. I also added my 2 cents, describing the bone mobs in more detail. Unfortunately, I hadn't yet figured out their weaknesses, so my speech was pretty short. It was something like, "They got hands like this, and knives like this, and teeth like this." But really, you didn't need to know anything else. If you knocked the bones to pieces, the king would just put together new ones, since there were more than enough of them there. They agreed that they would just waste their time, trying not to get in harm's way unnecessarily. And I would improvise, since there was nothing else I could do. I went first and the others followed behind me, keeping a distance of a little more than 50 feet away. That way I wouldn't suck up their strength. I had to waste a few more gray potatoes to get potions, since I had to use the old ones to get my own strength back. My total reserves had dwindled significantly, leaving me only 72 gray potatoes and 7 green ones. But whatever, I would get more. The main thing was to take out the boss and get my reward. I wasn't about to hold off on that for the sake of potatoes. We got to the last room with no problems. No one came back to life, and I hadn't missed anyone on the way, but we were still ready to get into a fight at any moment. No one but the berserker was relaxed. That guy couldn't care less, complaining the whole way that he had nobody to fight, which got him constant smacks from Brownie. I had forgotten to inform them that the deadies couldn't hear anything, but the sounds of those hearty smacks warmed my heart, so I kept stoically silent. After I left, the king had decided to return the bones to their original state, so now they were once again strewn across the floor. It seemed like keeping them alive cost him mana. "Start right after his staff flashes and the bones join into piles," I yelled at the fighters, which almost made them jump. "What are you yelling for? He'll hear you," Brownie answered in a stage whisper. "He won't hear. He has no ears," I shrugged. "Did you all get it?" I waited for them to nod yes, then dematerialized. I floated in the air for a second, weighing my options, then slowly flew into the room. The king was sleeping, like before, or more like he was pretending to sleep. His staff was still lying on his lap, but there was no point in thinking about taking it from him. His hand was holding on to it carefully, and as soon as I grabbed it, he would wake up. Or he might even manage to hit me. I took a deep, measured breath. Then I exhaled the same way. Let's go. At first I flew slowly, but the closer I got to the monster, the faster I went. Last time I had been able to spend some time flying around, studying the place and admiring the local architecture. I could have done all that now, but instead I got out my halberd and materialized a few feet in front of my opponent, stabbing him hard. Zhing! An instant before the point could pierce the king's skull, he opened his eyes and, with a swift movement, parried my attack with his staff. Sparks flew into the air, and my halberd was knocked to the side a little, plowing a deep furrow into the back of the stone throne. Right then I vanished into the air, but I couldn't get off another hit before the boss used his spell to raise the dead. The flash hurt my eyes, and I felt some sort of negative energy pass through me. My health bar also told me that this spell hadn't gone through harmlessly. Now I had 90% health, but that was no big deal. It wasn't even time to use a potion yet. I sent the next attack toward his body, doing a sweeping hit from the side, but he was able to block it this time too. Still, it was clear that if I hit a little harder, he would have a bad time. I wasn't that interested in his staff, so I wasn't going to try to save it. If I had to disintegrate it to kill the beast, then that's what I would do. He parried the next hit easily too, then tried to counterattack, but his staff just whizzed through me. "You will die," a hoarse voice roared, nearly bursting my eardrums, and the king, raising his staff toward the ceiling, began casting his death ray. The unavoidable energy flowed in a heavy stream straight toward my chest, but at the last moment, I put my hand in front of me and activated the ring. It worked like a vacuum cleaner, sucking up the ray, gleaming with lightning, into itself, and after a few seconds, it was gone. "Your actions will not go unpunished." More pretentious talk. But while he was distracted, I got out my bow and loosed a fire arrow. It hit the king right in the chest, and he was soon covered in flame, but that didn't bother him a bit. There was another flash, and the resurrected dead doubled in number. My insides were suddenly seized up by how furious the roars at the entrance were. Brownie was no joke, but all I could see from the center of the room were broken bones flying all over the place. I was hit with powerful blasts of air a few times, and I could also sometimes hear the vulgar swearing of the berserker. Every second he grew stronger, and his voice only got louder. But there was no time to be distracted. The king, looking down on me from above, showed a vicious smile. His skin, which up to that point had been kept on his face only by a miracle, cracked from that and started sloughing off, and soon his skull was completely exposed. Only two small red fires stared at me from somewhere out of the black depths of his empty eye sockets. "Your fate is sealed." His voice groaned once again, and his staff started to fill up with energy. If I recalled correctly, after this came the ray. But my ring still needed at least a day to recharge. Not worrying about conserving my mana, I dematerialized and hurried toward my opponent. Flying behind him, I swung, but he jumped forward, and the blade only whistled through the air, clashing against the stone throne once again. I wasn't paying any attention to what was going on around me. The shapeless bone monsters were bustling around, but it was like they wanted nothing to do with me and focused all their strength on my team. It was as though time had stopped, and I couldn't take my eyes off of the tip of the staff as it filled up with power. In a moment, the ray, bristling with energy, would hit me, but as soon as he cast it, I, using the last of my energy, immediately moved a few feet to the side. The attack spell flew into the back of the bone monsters. Turning around only for a second, I saw that it hadn't done them any damage. In fact, a misshapen, two-headed, four-legged beast, constructed from the remains of more than one creature, started growing in size. It was like its bones were breaking apart and weaving together, taking on a completely different shape. After a few moments, where the deformed abomination had stood there was now a true killing machine. Its outer bones had turned into spiked armor, its limbs had gotten stronger, and its faces had stretched out, with long, sharp teeth sticking out of both mouths now. The ray eventually made its way back toward me, and now I definitely couldn't dodge it. All I could do was run forward and kill the boss before it turned me into dust. However, when I was only a stone's throw away, the ray caught up to me. Why did it damage me last time, but made the bone monsters stronger? He was definitely some kind of necromancer with death spells that could strengthen the dead and kill the living. "Ah, blarg la blarg," shouted Gosha as soon as he appeared in my hands. Instead of in my chest, the ray landed right in his face. I had put my hands in front of me and held him by the ears, protecting myself from the fatal energy with the artifact, continuing to move slowly forward. Eventually, the monster's mana ran out. Some unhealthy-looking smoke was rising up from the head, and as soon as the ray finally ended, I threw Gosha at the king. He mumbled something unintelligible and latched onto the king's collarbone, scraping his teeth over the hard surface. The king wasn't expecting that, so he allowed me to get a powerful hit of my halberd off, which easily knocked him off his feet. He tried to stand up, but I hit him down again. "You wouldn't dare! You cannot!" He started shouting some nonsense again. "It is simple foolish to think that you can defeat—" Crack! The test is finished. In 30 minutes, you will be returned to from where you have come. Choose your rewards at the terminal. 29.59. 29.58. My halberd sliced his skull down the middle, and his voice broke off in the middle of the word. The fires in his eyes went out, his bony body slackened. The terminal. Only now did I turn my attention toward the stone located at the end of the room across from the entrance, which was like the one at the beginning. Or maybe it just appeared there right now. But I didn't have time to consider the question of the stone appearing. Within a second, the king's ring flashed brightly, and his bones turned into mist. The cloud, shouting out red discharges, floated up to the ceiling, and everything froze. "You fool! Such a nobody could never overcome the king." With that, the clouds started sparking even more, and in an instant the clouds separated into small jets that sped toward the living bones. Didn't I literally just do that? "I am death. It is not for you to defeat me. A part of me will now be within each of the dead." Every single deformed bone monster froze, and the mist started pouring into their bony corpses. The whole process took just a few seconds, so nobody had time to react. Both me and my fighters were still, blinking our eyes in surprise, not understanding what was happening. But the transfer of the king had finished, and now the gazes of 100 weird and dangerous creatures were turned on me with their fiery red eyes. "Are you ready to die?" The wicked laugh finally brought me to my senses, and vanishing into the air, I headed towards my team. If I had to go through every bone in this royal trash hole, then I would do it. And I would do it until there was nobody left in that hall but us. Chapter 24. Dozens, or maybe even hundreds, of bone monsters rushed to attack all at once. At that moment, I was torn. On the one hand, they would tear apart and destroy my team right now. On the other hand, we had to hold out for a half an hour, and I couldn't help them right now. My halberd was on its last legs. Just a few more useless cleaves on the deadies, and it would be dust. And I couldn't take on hundreds of freaks with my brass knuckles and hammer. The bone guys had gotten significantly stronger and more durable since the main boss of the underground went into them. I realized that since now the bear couldn't tear them into pieces so easily and casually, barely holding out against their onslaught before the rest of them tore apart the beasts with an extreme number of hits. Especially the berserker. He had a lot of injuries on his body, and his clothes were covered in blood, but that just seemed to give him more power. Without stopping his shouting and spewing of profanities, he threw himself into the thick of the monsters, getting in hit after hit. Their bones cracked and broke, their skulls were smashed into bone meal, but they still kept right on coming. It seemed they could take care of it for now, and they didn't need me too much. But I definitely was needed right away on the other side of the room. The army of deadies did not know fear, and that was the only reason the deformed freaks could keep pushing forward, pushing each other and getting in each other's way. Most of the monsters were awkward creates, seeming as if they had been made using a random bone connection machine. Some of them had 3 legs each, some had no arms, so were just heaps with incomprehensible growths sticking out on all sides. The whole armed creaked, clacked, and knocked their bones together, filling the whole room up with the sound. But there were some lucky shapes, too. Those ones were more like people, but there were some that were similar to different kinds of animals. The monsters like that were the most dangerous, with nothing impeding their movement or keeping them from implementing their full fighting potential. The bear and the berserker had the passage completely covered, while the archer and spearmen were arrayed behind them. Although the long-range fighter casting his magic more than he was using the weapon I gave him, but that was doing him quite well. The blades of air flew out of his hands one after another. Although they rarely ever broke through the monster's bones, the powerful streams of air often knocked them down, creating jams and chaos in the ranks of the enemy. The spearman had taken up position behind his powerful companions, accurately hitting enemies one by one. Every once in a while, his weapon would be bathed in light, and that usually happened before an attack on an especially powerful monster. That must be his class skill. After hits like that, even the strongest skulls would be left with significant holes. and those hits came much faster, too. But the main death machine remained Brownie. They attacked the bear, gnawing at him, trying to cut through. Useless. He staunchly resisted the attacks flying at him like hail, and returned the favor by turning his enemies into bone meal with his extremely powerful paws. He didn't shy away from tasting them either. A single lunge and his iron jaws tore apart the unlucky bastards seized from the raging crowd. Once the king had turned into a cloud and entered his subordinates, they became not just stronger, but some sort of collective intelligence came to them. It was very much like a sentient leader was controlling the crowd of zombies. Actually, it might even be that. You just couldn't damage this smarty apart from the whole crowd. The monsters formed into dense streams, trying to beef up their defense, undulating like waves. But each time they crashed against the fighters like a cliff. All the while, smaller monsters were trying to get around the two large, frenzied fighters. A bone mass about the size of a cat, but looking more like a deformed hedgehog, sneaked under them, slowly and surreptitiously, hiding among the pieces of bone, and stole up to the archer, stabbing him in the leg. "Fuck!" he shouted, and a powerful blast of air immediately blew the tricky beast to pieces. "Take cover!" He took 2 steps back and took a couple of potions. Even though the injury on his leg wasn't critical, he was still gushing blood, and he couldn't just leave it like that. "Grah!" roared the bear, knocking apart another giant-sized abomination to pieces. He redoubled his attack, since the deadies were now forming back into a pile, and without coverage from the mage's air attacks, they could mount an attack. With his first hit, the bear knocked apart some of the attackers, and with his second, he smashed a gigantic monster into the floor. It was the same one that the necromancer had accidentally powered up with his spell. But one of the bone beast's 2 heads was still able to get his teeth into Brownie's paw, and his razor-sharp, gnarled teeth easily pierced through the fur. The bear roared and started beating his free paw against the monster's face as hard as he could, but that didn't seem to bother him a bit. Next, the berserker joined the fray. He started crushing bones with swift hits of his brass knuckles, trying to break through to his friend, but the beast just kept coming and coming. A few bone sets that resembled people just avoided the free-for-all, heading straight for the spearman and the archer, ready to eviscerate the bastards and eat their flesh. "Your days are numbered, lower ones," the voice shouted again, and it sounded like it came from everywhere at once. After that shout, it was like the deadies had been let off their leash. The fires in their eyes gleamed brighter, and they started to scramble around like their heart's only desire was to kill. The back rows pushed the front rows forward, and stopping this army was now impossible. "Shit!" shouted the spearman when he was stabbed with a bone spike to the chest that passed right through him. The boy fell to the ground into a fit of coughing. The archer let out a powerful wave of air, finally running out of mana, and dragged his friend backwards toward the exit. He knew that they couldn't hold out for 30 minutes, but he simply had to try to save his friend anyway. The berserker and Brownie were blocked in by bones, but they still tried to put up a fight. The bear's roar and the vulgar swearing of the man, finally driven insane, nearly drowned out the crashing of the bones, but it was all for nothing, since even the broken beast had started slowly restoring themselves and crawling toward their victims. "God damn, hallelujah!" came a furious shout, and in an instant the whole room was flooded with a bright light. Price: 1,000 holy grenade. Rare. Description: single-use item. Damage radius: 100 feet. Damages the undead and paralyzes them. Heals the living. Break to activate. Balance: 4,088. 2, please. The grenades immediately popped into my inventory, and my balance was reduced by 2,000 points. They looked like glass ostrich eggs with intricate patterns on the surface and an off-white liquid glittering with 1,000 sparkles inside. But my purchases didn't stop there. The stone, covered with twinkling green runes, which was located at the far end of the room, helpfully presented me with a rather wide selection of possible acquisitions for any taste and price range. But it was annoying that rare items that weren't single-use cost way more. Price: 3,500 Bonebreaker, rare. Strength +10, crushing blow. 2,000 over 2,000. Description: mana 50 over 50, crushing blow. Upon activation of the skill, your next hit will do increased crush damage. The striking force of the weapon will be tripled. Effective against armored enemies. Recharges in 5 seconds. It was not bad for a two-handed hammer. Breaking through all the survivors would not be hard using it, but my budget was already pretty meager. Plus, I didn't have the strength to swing it around. I didn't even know much it actually weighed. Swords, axes, spears. At the moment, the only things that I wanted were things I couldn't afford. The cheaper ones just didn't inspire me, so it was better to just leave the red crystals for later and do a full shopping spree after the next test. But besides weapons, there were also items in the list. I really didn't have time, but I still gave it a once-over, letting my eyes linger only on the most interesting ones. In any case, I simply didn't have the resources for most of them, so I ended up stopping on price: 2,000. Ring of 4 times mass, rare, extra weight, 100 over 100. Description: mana 10 over 10, extra weight, an active skill. Upon activation, quadruples the mass of the item in your hand for 1/4 of a second. Cost 2 mana points. Recharges in 2 seconds. Use radius of 30 feet. I just couldn't help but buy it. I had looked at that hammer that also got heavier when you hit and instantly wanted something else like it. The ring might not give me the same advantages, but you could maneuver much more freely with it. You could increase the mass of your weapon right when you hit and break even the hardiest monster into pieces. Too bad that I didn't have enough for anything else, but that was just a matter of time. There was a wide selection, and now even collecting the shadow set wouldn't be hard. A few more times like this and I would be significantly stronger. Finished shopping? Yes/no. I closed the menu and was just about to head over and help my team when another window flashed in front of my face. In this underground, you killed 2 bosses. Choose 1 reward for each of them. Unique items stat point level up +1, blocked. I wondered who would pick the last one. Craziness. Well, it was blocked, anyone. No point in even thinking about it. The choice here was pretty simple, since I could get a fair amount of stat points from the blue potatoes. I confirmed my choice twice, and then opened my inventory, putting both of the rainbow spheres onto my palm. Pet collar, unique. Voice of animal. Description: voice of animal, a passive skill. Allows you to use and understand human speech. Works only in animal form. Recommended classes: beast, druid, shapeshifter. I knew exactly who that would work for. But it wasn't any less annoying, since I really wanted to see what would work for a ghost. Did that mean the bear couldn't understand what we said? Interesting. But in any case, that problem was now solved. Okay, next one. Ghost Slungshot, unique. Materialization, mana transfer. 500 over 500. Description: mana 50 over 50. Immaterial weapon. Materialization, an active skill. Upon activation, it forces the striking part of the weapon to materialize for a predetermined period of time. Costs 10 points of mana per second. Mana transfer, an active skill. Allows you to transfer mana to the weapon. Note: in its immaterial state, the item maintains its physical properties. Recommended classes: Ghost, Shadow. A goddamn Ghost Slungshot. Even the name was fire. It would immediately make you believe, no doubt, that this weapon was the strongest on the planet, without fail. No weird nunchaku or other Japanese bullshit, but a real homemade slungshot. In my hands, more precisely. Plus, its second ability made it even more deadly, a perfect pairing. Of course, now I would have to do something about my mana stores, too. I hardly had enough for my movement, and now every hit would waste up a ton more. The slungshot itself was a spiked ball, hanging on a fairly long chain. About 5 feet, give or take. The ball itself was about the size of an orange, which, I believe, could easily break any enemy's skull. And the length of the chain allowed you to make a fairly good swing. In general, I was very happy with the weapon. Now, I just needed to learn how to use it. Thankfully, its immateriality meant that I wouldn't end up smacking myself in the head with it. Maintaining its physical qualities meant, as far as I could tell, that I could swing it around as a ghost and send the spiky end into my enemies. I didn't know how else you could interpret that line. Shit! I barely heard the cry of pain among the clattering of the bones from the other end of the wide area. Right when I was looking at my new stuff, my companions, it seemed, were already being trampled into the stone floor. Realizing that I had spent too much time in indecision, I hurried over to the sounds of battle. Goddamn hallelujah! I had just barely returned to the material world and appeared behind the beasts when I swing with all my might and threw my first gift. I had 2 holy grenades, but I had bought one of them to save for a rainy day, so there was no point in using up all my ammunition right away. The semi-darkness of the massive hall was lit up with an extraordinarily bright flash in an instant. But the light didn't hurt your eyes. Just the opposite. It was quite nice. I didn't turn into a ghost to get out of harm's way, but rather took the holy charge into my body. In any case, ghosts aren't people at all. Lots of people consider them to be the undead, so it wasn't worth it to risk it. I could have been turned to dust by my own weapon, even though the death ray had damaged me in that state. Still, better safe than sorry. So my body was bathed in the rays emanating in all directions from where the grenade exploded. My skin was warmed, all the many scratches on my body stopped hurting, and I felt peaceful and calm. Moreover, I wasn't the only one who felt calm. I don't know how long I spent in a trance, but when I came to, I saw that all the remaining undead had frozen. Only their fiery red eyes were darting about in a panic, not understanding why the bones had stopped obeying their hosts. After vanishing, I appeared by one of the human-looking beasts and started swinging my slungshot. That was a pretty unfamiliar and strange thing. The spiked ball didn't listen to me very well, and when I activated the materialization ability, it flew forward, just barely hitting my target. The bone warrior swayed and clattered to the floor. But the 2 red fires burned in his eyes all the same. He had simply lost his balance, nothing more. Okay, yeah, I would need to practice. I had to put my new weapon aside and use one that I was already used to. After shutting off my class skill, the first thing I did was cut down the humanoid monster lying on the floor. My blade cracked his skull, and the fire in his eyes went out immediately. Next, I went after the 2-headed down that had nearly bitten through the bear's throat. He was lying unconscious on the floor, with a massive, bony body pressing down on him from above. My ring of mass shone brightly one instant, before the blade, traveling at an unbelievable speed, pierced the gigantic skull of the monster. Grah! The thick, heavy bones were covered in cracks that broke like glass, flying into a large number of shards, while I was carried forward by inertia. I would have to get used to this artifact too, but its effectiveness could not be underestimated. The second head also shattered with one hit as soon as I repeated the trick. I went after the giant 2-headed dog first because it was beginning to show signs of life. But that made sense, since the strongest monster would get over the paralysis the fastest. But now, my halberd having shattered its last skull, turned into dust right in my hands. Yes, my ring was awesome, but I had completely forgotten that such powerful hits must be very hard on a weapon. But there was no time to cry over spilt milk. I got out my hammer and started doling out hits left and right, taking out the especially powerful beasts. Then I started on those that were a little weaker. I used up all the charges in my ring pretty fast, but by that time, the only ones left standing were the normal abominations, not remarkable in any way. They had only survived because they had been too far from the epicenter of the explosion. What hit me right away, completely unexpectedly, was that the ring worked much better with blunt weapons. The hammer, unlike the halberd, didn't lose its durability too quickly, and ground down the bones of the monsters much more effectively. Just one hit, and a monster would be completely turned into dust. What was that just now? The berserker climbed out of a mountain of bones. The blood had already started drying on his skin, and he looked completely lost. I don't understand Jack. I second the question. The spearman had opened his eyes. He had recently been run through by a spike, and the last thing he remembered was how the archer had been trying to drag him backward into the corridor. "Grrr," groaned Brownie, getting out from under the mess just like the berserker. He had turned back into a person, and judging from his state, the only thing he wanted now was to die. I couldn't help but take pity on the dying beast and tossed him a beer. Despite his state, he caught the rejuvenating can of beer with a deft movement and pounded the whole thing into his mouth in literally 2 seconds. Ah! He sighed in enjoyment, lying down on his back. "Hey!" Slob was upset, but nobody paid him any attention. Whatever. He would survive without beer. The archer had literally just downed a potion, so he looked just fine. Plus, he had been farther than the others from the center of the explosion and hadn't experienced nirvana like the rest had. "Everybody alive?" I checked, making sure that nobody was going to die in the near future, then turned on my skill. There were only 25 minutes left until we returned to where we had come from. What I liked about my skill was that in my ghost form I really knew how to wait. There was no difference between 25 minutes and 25 years. I could just hang around and watch how humanity dealt with all their misfortunes, building a new civilization. Or how they slowly but surely died off. 005. I hadn't noticed how time flew past. The fighters had come to a little in that time, and it seemed they were now getting ready for battle. I had no idea where they had come from to get here. Maybe it had been right out of the thick of a zombie horde. Yeah, well, I hadn't been taken here from a comfortable bed either. You passed the test. Choose your reward. Unique skill stat point level up +1. Blocked. Definitely a nice bonus. And it was good that the rest of the team members could also get something useful for themselves. I was sure they would pick stat points. It was no mean feat for regular mortals to get them. But I had no destination, only a journey. So I picked Pyrophilia, Unique. Description: a passive skill. When your body is covered in fire, your conduit's stat increases by 1.1 to 1.5 times. It depends on the area that is in contact with the fire. It seemed that if I were to completely enter a bonfire, my conduits would become stronger by 1.5 times. Not bad, but I didn't feel like having to heal the burns afterward. But for somebody with protection from fire, it could be very useful. Even more if they put some points in it and raised the multiplier. Having appeared by the semi-truck, I immediately activated my dematerialization skill again. It was really annoying that it shut off after teleportation, but it is what it is. And what am I going to do now? I didn't even remember where I had been headed. Wasn't I flying to the dead Smarty, so I could dig around in his guts and get his crystal? Then I came across this semi-truck. The dog! I immediately dove into the back, but it was empty in there. The cage had been carefully opened, not broken, and there were no traces of blood inside. It seemed like they had been able to run away, taking my reward from the leveled-up big guy along the way. Well, I wasn't going to hang around here either. I had just gotten a wildly uncomfortable weapon in my arsenal, and I had to deal with it in the future. I started swinging the spiked ball as soon as I spotted the perfect victim. A big guy, only partially covered with bone armor. The perfect punching bag, not too soft and not too hard. Swing! The weapon bounced off the bone armor, but without turning the materialization skill off, I swung the ball around my head and slammed it into the monster's head as hard as I could. That was much better. Although the description did say that the physical properties were retained, still, when you didn't activate the materialization skill, you felt like you were using it underwater. You simply couldn't swing the spiked ball fast enough. It was like something was constantly slowing it down. It was much better when it whistled through the air. I didn't really feel its weight, so I could use it as much as I wanted, or more like, as much as my mana allowed. Within 10 seconds, I had turned the big guy into mincemeat. I didn't stop even after the reward fell out of him, continuing to practice my technique with this fairly strange weapon. Maybe our ancient ancestors had used this thing in a completely different way, but for me it was absolutely comfortable to do what I was doing. Plus, it was insanely more effective. Now I wouldn't have to constantly be changing my weapon, since I definitely wouldn't find a more perfect weapon anytime soon anyway. Warning: the first phase of the system has finished. The second phase is starting now. The Abilities tab has been unblocked. Ability rewards have been unblocked. The level cap of 10 has been removed. A level cap of 20 has been instated. The changes will come into effect in 3, 2, 1. Chapter 25. The world around me went dark, but after only a moment, it came back. This time my dematerialization didn't shut off, so I was still safe. I could not say the same for other people. I was sure that this change of the system to a new phase could have really messed up some people's plans. For instance, if someone had been running away from a horde of zombies chasing them at that very moment. But now I understood why I hadn't been able to level up. All the pieces were slowly started to fall into place. Of course, you bitch. You could have given us some instructions. Right, system? I swung the spiked ball over my head and loosed it at the nearest deadie. He had only started turning toward the sound of it whistling through the air a fraction of a second before, and the thing hit him right in the forehead, smashing his skull and spraying his brains on the concrete. Level up +1. I had already started to miss that message. I immediately felt like I would soon start getting stronger, and that warmed my heart. I leveled up after killing just a single first-level freak because I had already gotten the necessary experience before this. If there were a bar for experience, then just a minute ago it had been filled practically to bursting. So it only needed the slightest push. I wasn't wasting time and went to my interface immediately. I was still very interested to see what the system would say in its messages there. Name: Casp. Level: 11. Class: Ghost. Stats: Body: 16. Strength: 6. Dexterity: 6. Constitution: 4. Mind: 21. Intelligence: 6. Reaction: 9. Perception: 6. Spirit: 12. Repository: 9. Conduits: 3. Available stat points: 2. Skills: Active, Passive, Energy Vampire, Rare, 10. Additional: Dematerialization, Class Skill. Available skill points: 13. Abilities: Martial, Craft. Available ability points: 2. Auction. Inventory: 460 pounds. Everything was very interesting and tempting. From what I could tell, now, in addition to books, spheres, and potatoes, something else would fall from the deadies. It was these abilities, and it sounded like something very useful. I hoped people would soon start finding things like that so I could figure out what kind of limits there were. Most likely, it would be just like the skills, but I wanted to know it exactly before I started choosing what worked for me. For instance, shooting a bow would be very useful for me. But even better would be learning how to swing this ghostly piece of junk. But I wasn't counting on getting that lucky, although I would leave a slot open for it anyway. I was also happy about the ability points. I was sure you could get that not only from leveling up, and my professional growth wouldn't have to wait. But it was important to remember that while you sleep, your enemies are making moves. I spent my available stat points immediately. I put everything into mana without a single second thought. Every attack or movement I made cost mana. And though my energy vampire skill kept it wonderfully full, I still didn't have nearly enough. Damn it, I forgot to give that collar away. Now I had to fly back to the police station, even though I had intended to focus on leveling up and getting new rewards as quickly as possible. I decided to worry about the auction later, but everything about it was already clear. You just bought and sold what you need. With what currency? I would find that out only at the phase of the system's evolution. While I was flying in that direction, passing through buildings and other obstacles, I was considering whether it was worth it to spend all my skill points on the ones I already had. On the one hand, absorbing mana from my enemies was an extremely useful thing, but on the other, you never knew if you could get something else. I might suddenly end up with something much more powerful. Like, I had no attack skills at all, and I needed to fix that as soon as possible. Grrr. As soon as I flew out of an apartment complex, I could hear the sound of a motor gradually getting louder in the distance. The source of the sound showed up soon enough. It was a military vehicle, knocking slow deadies down in its wake, and dragging the broken-down husks of cars right through the street. But eventually it turned onto the sidewalk, turned slowly around, and backed up to one of the many grocery stores there. The truck itself was souped up. Sharp rebar had been welded like spikes all around it, and the cabin, like the back, had been reinforced significantly. Ballistic glass had been installed in place of the normal kind, so the driver wouldn't even consider leaving his post. He would just lean back in his seat, chain-smoking and lazily watching the deadies pounding on the door. It was clear it wasn't their first time going out here. They didn't seem like military, much less like transport workers. That was immediately obvious from their behavior and communication, with no enjoyment of their work or unconditional mindless obedience to orders. The opposite, actually. They were relaxed, constantly joking around with each other, stopping only because of the zombies coming from all sides. "Get the fuck out! We only got a couple minutes!" shouted one man whose front teeth had been knocked out. Because of that, his voice sounded pretty funny, and one of the other guys couldn't help but remind him of it. "Hey, Lispy, don't whistle like that. Get your ass out, those are the orders," shouted out another one. Before jumping out of the back, he put his hands in front of him, and a short but powerful wave of flame jumped out of them. The zombies were knocked down, and only then did the fighters start spilling out of their safe spot. They took out the deadies with ease, but just because there were practically no mutants among the zombies. Plus, the guys knew what they were doing. Every one of them used his skills and system weapons. They were definitely not soldiers. Those ones would take at least a month to develop any idea of the system at all. And until then, they would be running around with AKs for sure. The collar could wait. I was too interested in watching the experts work. So I slipped into the store behind them and started watching. 2 fighters stood at the entrance, taking out first-level zombies so they wouldn't get in the way of their loading. 2 more were dragging out boxes, and the last one was running through the store and marking what needed to be taken out first. No wasted energy. Plus, the loaders could easily lift 100 to 200 pounds each at a time. Maybe they were pretty strong to begin with. Or maybe when the system came, they put their points only into strength. It was impossible to tell now. But in any case, they were loading the truck like a whole team of workers. But I was immediately set on edge by the fact that they each put 1 box into their inventory every time. And that was at least 50 pounds, perhaps more. And the only person who had increased their inventory doing good deeds was me, as far as I knew. Somehow I'm feeling tired. One of them sat down on a bag of buckwheat. I guess he didn't get enough sleep. Yeah, me too, agreed the other one, also falling onto the groceries. And now I was full of strength. Narrowing the area of effect of my energy vampire skill had worked wonders. I was completely refilled in 5 minutes. Yip! I caught a muffled sound from the storeroom. Seems like I knew who it was. The dog yapped, barely audibly, then was silent. But that was enough to startle the fighters. Putting their weapons in front of them, they sauntered over toward the sound. They knew firsthand that even the most innocent-looking animal could turn out to be an extremely powerful and bloodthirsty monster. This new world quickly taught you to never let your guard down. Right then I slipped into that storeroom and spotted my old acquaintances there. The girl in the vet uniform and the dog she was protecting. But the dog didn't have a ribbon on anymore. She must have given her a potion. The girl had her hand pressed over the poor dog's mouth, which was not able to calm down due to too much excitement. But the dog kept on whining and wagging her tail against the wall. "Quiet, Basie girl," whispered the girl into the dog's ear, barely audible. But the dog instead started yipping even more. "Stand down, men," grinned the man missing teeth. "It's a chick with a dog." He had opened the door first and grinned in satisfaction. "A regular one, yeah?" asked the guy standing behind him, trying to elbow his way through the doorway occupied by his excessively wide companion. "None of your business," he shouted, entering the storeroom, slamming the door behind him. "Go and keep loading." Right then, I activated the ability in my hood, which allowed me to learn a little more about my opponent. I needed to figure out what to do with him anyway. Name, Jorah Sherbati, level 11. Class, Druid, Uncombrate. Health, 89%. Mana, 68%. Condition, general fatigue, lack of sleep. Injured right knee, superficial scratch on the neck. Well, since your class is uncommon, your fate is sealed, friend. The man took a few steps toward the girl and the dog, then froze, breaking out into a predatory smile. He had immediately evaluated her appearance, and she was completely to his liking. Even more since she was afraid. He loved it when his victims fought back. "Don't be afraid. We're nice." He sat down on his coat and showed her that his hands were empty. The men on the other side of the door had gone off to keep loading the truck, so nobody would be bothering them for a while. "Do you want us to take you to our camp?" "Do you have a big one?" mumbled the girl in fright. She was still holding back the dog with all her strength. It had stopped wagging its tail and would not stop growling at the man. "Very big." He grinned again, showing off his Hollywood smile. "And girthy." He took a few steps forward, and only then did the girl realize that none of them would be her savior. "Rah!" The dog tore out of her hands and leaped at the attacker. For a second he was surprised at the audacity, but soon his smile widened even more, and a cudgel appeared in his hand. The man swung the weapon, ready to give the dog a fatal beating, but... Thwack! A dagger slashed at his neck, leaving a deep scratch, and the man suddenly went limp like a rag doll on the floor. A figure appeared right behind him, but the girl was unable to make out the face of the person. A single look from him, along with his secretiveness, aroused fear, so the girl cowered into the corner even more. But the dog didn't pay any attention to the new player, instead starting to tear the rapist's crotch to pieces. He had not lost consciousness, but was more like paralyzed, so he experienced the full gamut of feelings from the dog's actions, but he couldn't move an inch. "Not too bad." The boy in the dark cloak nodded to himself. "I thought the poison would take some time to be absorbed into the blood." "Let go, dummy!" After a few seconds, the unknown boy started tearing the dog off of the already significantly torn-up crotch of the man, but he did it as carefully as possible so he wouldn't hurt her. "Grab her and turn around." Having managed it, he handed the dog to her owner and made her stare at the wall. Just wasn't about to argue, so turned toward the corner. Not that the girl could have done anything to him anyway, even if she wanted to. She also remembered how someone like that had already saved her a couple of hours ago. But she remembered the face of her savior very well, and she couldn't recognize this stranger at all. Holy fuck!
Is that all for me?
She heard another voice that she didn't recognize at all behind her. Come get it! Behind her, she heard the sound of lips smacking, mixed with vulgar phrases expressing enjoyment, and then something rolling across the floor. Right then, her curiosity got the better of her, and the girl sneakily turned her head around.
Oh!
She helped, and immediately turned back around. She had seen that the rapist's neck had been gnawed to pieces. Blood was everywhere, and large pieces had been torn out of his throat. It was clear that the man was already dead. She was mostly just confused by the killer. It was a cut-off, but extremely satisfied zombie head. I did tell you not to look, the boy smiled. Now you're going to have bad dreams. Fuck, wailed the head like a spirit, and, noticing that he had caused the girl to wince in fright, the zombie piece barked in laughter. You done? Asked the stranger, and seeing the zombie's contented face, touched it with his leg, and so put it back in his inventory. I'll deal with that later. You... The girl turned around again when she realized the zombie was gone. Those guys... She pointed towards the door, clearly implying that the men weren't done. Those guys there are mine. She could see a smile under the hood, and after a moment, the figure vanished into thin air. Right away, she could hear loud smacks, cries of pain, and even the sounds of skills being used on the other side of the door. But the sounds didn't last long, and in a minute the door opened, and through it she could see the same savior as before. Let's go. I'll take you to some decent people. The boy nodded the dog toward the exit, and she, barely whimpering, ran up to him and stuck her nose on him. You can come with us, too. Keep us company, why not? He shook his hand at the girl, already heading toward the store's exit. About 250 pounds. Yeah, I hadn't made any mistakes.
The only question was, who did they kill? And where do you get so many people? So now my inventory space was a bit over 655 pounds. That meant I could carry around a lifetime supply of instant noodles, and those reserves would be enough for a decent population to live well for a number of years. As far as I could tell from their vehicle, they had come from somewhere nearby, probably a village or something like that. That was the only place you could find stuff like that. And you couldn't fix it up like that in the city. The girl followed me and climbed into the armored cab without asking any questions. Bassi came in right behind her. The dog looked much better, and for some reason she kept putting her nose into my palm. I would have to ask the vet girl why her animal liked me so much. So, what's your name? I asked, just in case, sitting behind the steering wheel. If I knew what was here and for what? Olya, she answered. You? Casp. I managed to turn the engine over, but then there were problems. Even if I had managed to put it into first gear, after that I just had no idea how and where to put the damn levers. How are you supposed to drive this? Can I get behind the wheel? She asked, and seeing my surprised face, started explaining. My dad worked in the fields, where I had no choice but to learn to drive. And she was right. As soon as she got behind the wheel, everything went smoothly. Delicately avoiding the beaten-up husks of abandoned cars, the truck groaned and flattened some careless zombies into pancakes. The only thing left for me to do was to occasionally give direction and enjoy how the deadies' brains splattered over the asphalt. It was too bad, of course, that you didn't get rewards for killing them like that. Life would be so much easier. Although, who knew? Maybe we would find our own system truck, too. While we were driving, she didn't stop talking for even a second.
She talked about living in a village, about how she loved animals, about how she studied well, and how she ended up in that store. And then that strange man just disappeared. I sat in the cab for a while. Then I took Basai and we just ran. Then, right when I saw an open door, I immediately ran into and hid. And then those guys showed up. There it is. You save people over and over, and then they call you strange. I smiled. Has that strange man been gone for a long time? About 2 hours. So that was you. I knew it. I have an awesome memory for faces, but I couldn't recognize you. 2 hours meant. It seemed like the system tests took a more or less fixed amount of time. And I wasn't mistaken when I noted that time passed differently there, separately and completely independent of our world. I took off my hood and its effect disappeared immediately. The girl's eyes widened in surprise, and she stared at me, not holding back her emotions. That caused our truck to run over a couple of small cars just a bit. Ah, wait! She veered off the road again, taking her eyes off it for a few seconds. And then a blue potato appeared in her right hand. This is yours. Well then. I gave her a couple of brownie points in my mental file, took the potato, and right in front of her surprised eyes, popped it into my mouth. My intelligence increased again. Was the system trying to tell me something? After just about 10 minutes, we arrived at the police station. It took that long because some of the roads were completely closed off, and we had to take a fairly big detour. In that time, a crowd had formed. Even though there were quite a few deadies around the building already, now it had become pretty fun here. I wondered what Brownie would tell me about that. Don't run off right away. I need to clear everything first. I activated my skill and headed into the building. Will you open the door in a few minutes? Right off, I frightened a whole group of fighters with my appearance. I was asking the archer who had just recently participated in the test with me. Yeah, he said, confused. But there are a lot of zombies there. We might not make it. And we need to get the order from Oleg. Good. Open the door in a couple of minutes, or I will remove it. Got it? I smiled and, clapping my hand on the guy's shoulder, disappeared again. My slingshot was raring to go, but I had to try some new tactics. I had thought up a massive number of them in my head, and now it was time to take them from theory to practice. Chapter 26. My aura of mana and power absorption spread out over a good 100 or more feet. It included both the inhabitants of the station as well as most of the deadies. It may be sucking up 2 times less in percentage, but on the other hand, there were now 4 times as many donors. The spiky ball hung in the air and froze. But only for a few seconds. Very soon it started whistling through the air, twirling around at an unbelievable speed. My goal was not so much leveling up as it was practicing. At the same time, I had to clear the path for the dog, but who was going to deny me the chance to mix business with pleasure? The ball, spinning at unbelievable speeds, easily pierced through the deadies' brains just as soon as it came into contact with their heads. And that was quite convenient, since I had no intention of staying on the ground. It was surprising, but even when the weapon had materialized, it didn't drag me downward, and I also didn't feel tired at all. Now, like a zombie, I could keep going from dawn till dusk. I wondered if the damage was now dependent on my strength or on those so-called conduits. My body wasn't even real right now, which meant my muscles had nothing to do with it. But nothing except a real test could prove my guess right. Floating slowly at a height of 5 feet in the air, I gradually thinned the herd of deadies, scattering pieces of their skulls all over. It even reached the truck, with all of its windshield and hood somehow sprayed over with viscous black liquid and pink brain matter. How disgusting. I wondered how terrible the stench was there now. But it was clear with the naked eye as soon as I saw Olya's face, and how hilariously she was trying to block up all the cracks in the vehicle. "It's no use, dummy. That's a zill. It is itself a solid crack cut out of a piece of cast iron. So just breathe it in and enjoy it. My power wasn't running out, but my mana was rushing out like it sprung a leak. I constantly had to stop and wait for my reserves to fill back up again. A full 10 seconds, and then another stop. I had a little more than 100 mana, but I really didn't want to let it get all the way to 0. I hadn't yet checked what would happen in that situation anyway. I wasn't even going to think about how much it was from moving around with a materialized weapon. And that was even with the help of constantly absorbing mana from everyone around. No, I had to do something with this ability. And it would certainly be worth it to upgrade it. With another weapon, it would be completely unavoidable. And you see, I'm collecting points again. But before that, I would have to reach level 20. No good to get ahead of yourself. Okay, yeah, everything was held back by these damned levels. But who could stop me from getting them all in, let's say, a day? "Ah, what do you want?" asked the head, upset, as soon as I materialized in the cab of a truck and dropped it on the floor. Cold, restless hands began beating on the sides, causing the heavy truck to shake just barely. "Pick 2 big guys out of the crowd and lead them away. Let the rest of them just crowd around you, got it?" "The hell? I got it, sure, but what the hell?" Gosha couldn't follow my train of thought. "I mean the big guys. Right now there is a massive number of rotting bodies near the building where people live. Someone has to get rid of them." I shrugged. "Plus, if all of your buddies are in a pile, then I won't have to fly around too much and can take them out more quickly." "Let's go already, I'm sick of talking. I was just asking out of politeness." After packing Gosha up, I flew out of the truck and started searching for the right spot. In theory, there was no problem with that. The zombies hadn't knocked the fence down completely, they had just broken it apart in spots. So I quickly found a spike sticking up. I jammed the head on top of it. It looked great, aesthetic and charming. "What up, kints? Everybody over here. You two, to the wall," the head started shouting. But as far as I could tell, he was just doing that to keep up appearances. The smarties could somehow still control those under their power, even without vocal commands. Was he trying to suck up? It was totally possible, since I had raised his level and let him eat a powerful human. I hoped he would get more. After I took care of these zombies, I would have to have a chat with the artifact, figure out what bonuses he got, and what his new talent would be in. But that was for later. The low-level regular zombies were drawn towards their new leader, but that was far from all of them. On some of them, his ability just didn't work at all, and keeping each and every one of them under his control was something he just couldn't do. The 2 big guys stood farther away, with their faces to the wall, while the rest of them, it seemed, I could leisurely chop down left and right. The mutated ones basically just stayed right at the area in front of the building. And everything went much more smoothly. When nobody got in your way, cutting down monsters got a whole lot simpler. I came down a little and started beating their stupid heads with my spiked ball, scattering brains all over the place. Big guys never went down at the first hit, so sometimes I had to stop, and each time I had to unfurl my weapon again. It was all a pointless waste of mana, but there was nothing else I could do. Plus, they always did drop nice green rewards, so all of my efforts were not entirely in vain. I decided to worry about the crowd milling around Gosha later. Those monsters were now harmless, and the girl and the dog could easily pass through into the station. And then, once they were safe, I could cull the zombies, and then I could talk to the head. The fewer mutants there were left, the slower my mana regenerated. But that made sense. I mean, I was mowing down my own donors. Having finished the lower-level mutants, my spiked ball, whistling through the air, directed itself towards the guys who were a little stronger. Letting it out as far as it would go, I flew up to a big guy covered in bone armor and hit him from above as hard as I could, activating one of my rings at the last moment. The weapon, increased 4 times in weight, easily broke through the thick bones and pierced through to his brain case, reaching almost all the way to his neck. I was forced to shut off the weapon's materialization, since getting it out using the traditional methods was now impossible. The ball had literally taken root in the mass of bones in the monster's skull. There were only a total of 5 charges in the ring, so I used it to take out only the strongest-looking ones. Thankfully, there turned out to be not too many of them. I only had to take my time with the stormtrooper. He could see and hear the ball flying through the air beside him and constantly dodged my attacks. I spent multiple hundreds of mana on that bastard,